This is my little red Vise, and I got it a few years ago back at the Beacon Flea Market. And I wanted to restore it as soon as I saw it, but unfortunately it sat in my basement for a while. Well, now the time has come, so let's get started on restoring this little guy. The first step, of course, is going to be to take this apart. And taking it apart wasn't too bad. I did notice that nothing was really attached to anything, so it was just a matter of getting the head open all the way and loosening up one nut. Before I started putting this stuff in the rust remover, I wanted to make sure I got any loose rust and debris off, so I tried with this little guy here to polish it up, but what I ended up figuring out was that most of what I thought was just loose rust and maybe loose grime and loose dirt was really just kind of baked onto the metal over time. So while I made a valiant effort with this little rotary tool, you see me here looking at it like, what are you doing, dude? Are you even doing anything? The reality is it wasn't really doing much because there wasn't much to take off with a wire wheel at this point. So eventually I just kind of punched out on this idea and said, enough of that. So into the container it went, and all the parts go right in, and we put in a little bit of evaporust, just enough to cover it up. And the nice thing about evaporust is there's no fumes, there's no toxic chemicals, and if you're really cheap like a lot of us are, or let's just say you're on a budget, you get to reuse it over and over and over again, which is the best part. As long as it works, you can keep using it. So we take the parts out about an hour later, and we just give them a quick little rinse to get any extra evaporust off of them. And they really do come out quite well. The nice thing is that the rust literally just vanishes off. As long as it's surface rust, you won't even see that there was ever any rust there. And it's not caustic, so you can handle it with your hands. You don't need to wear gloves. And you can just do what you need to do without having to think twice about safe handling procedures and all that fun stuff. And we'll just give everything a little pat dry, a little wipe after the rinse. And you can already see how much more silver the handle is than it was. It's a big improvement. And this is just rust remover. There's no other stuff in here. And of course, I'm a bit of a coward, so I had to try to figure out, well, how the hell am I going to get in here to get the little bits out? I did not want to dip my hand in it, so I didn't. And after pouring some out, I went back in and I got the rest of the parts out and got them into the water too. So it was the main handle, the smaller handle that locks it onto a pole, and the retaining nut. Next up was the part that I was really looking forward to the least. This is Citrus Strip, which is a pretty safe stripping gel, and I was really worried that the paint wasn't actually going to come off the vise. But as far as stuff you want to use for paint removal, Citrus Strip is probably the safest to use indoors without having to have extreme amounts of ventilation and fans and a respirator and all that stuff. So that's what I decided to use, mainly because that's what I had, let's be honest. So I had the bright idea to use a foam brush, and it wasn't the greatest idea. I mean, it worked, but the funny thing is that as safe as Citrus Strip is, it literally just dissolved the foam brush. But it did go on and stayed where I put it, so that was kind of cool. So after about a day and a second coat of Citrus Strip, I decided that whatever was on there, I was just going to have to work off. And you can see it's starting to come off, but it honestly didn't do as good a job as I'd hoped. But I think it's just because this vise is probably about 40 to 50 years old, and the paint was just really attached onto there. So it took a little bit of elbow grease, a nail brush, some water, and I just kept working it and working it and working it. And I did manage to get it cleaner than it was. Not as clean as I wanted it, but clean enough. So now, knowing that it was going to take some elbow grease anyway, I took a cut brush, chucked it into my drill using a carriage bolt, and I just started working all the parts again, just to get anything off that was on them. Here's me realizing that hand holding it while trying to work it with the cut brush is not the best idea. Elbow grease, elbow grease, elbow grease. Most of this restoration was a lot of elbow grease, but it was really fun because you could see the changes start to happen immediately. This cut brush did a great job getting off the layer of oxidation on the steel handles and the steel parts. And what ended up starting out as a black, horrible, dirty looking handle ended up being way cleaner when I was done. And I'm running this, I'm not running the drill at full speed here. I'm running it at a relatively low speed, just pushing the handle into it and slowly rotating it so I can make sure I get all the sides, and then hitting up any parts that I miss. And you can see here the difference is really dramatic. I mean, that looks like it did the day it was sold to whoever bought it before me. So I just chucked up the other handle and did the same thing. And the results were just as good. So outside to the driveway we go with the same cut brush and the same drill, trying to work the last of the paint off. And this took some time, but it was actually satisfying because the results were good quickly. The cut brush did a really good job right away. I didn't have to go at it. I think I worked on this in the driveway for a grand total of about 25 minutes or so. And I'm sorry, I didn't really do a great job of keeping this in frame, but you know, I'm new to this, so cut me a little slack, right? One of the things wrong with this vise was the jaws were just chewed up. I don't know what the person who had this before me was putting in them, but they were really badly beat up. So there were chunks out of the corners and chunks out of the faces of the jaws, and everything just needed to be just TLC'd. So I just put on a 36 grit flap disc on my angle grinder, which, by the way, if you don't have a battery-operated angle grinder, you're doing whatever you're doing wrong. This thing's amazing, and it gave me the ability to just go outside to my driveway and do this rather than having to try to control metal dust and stuff in my shop, and it did a really good job. You can see everything is just coming nice and shiny, and I just worked it just slowly over and over again, kept the angle grinder moving so it didn't leave any gouges. And everything worked great. There was one gouge in the anvil portion of the vise that I felt like if I just kept grinding at it, I might have been able to get rid of it. But the reality is I was worried about taking out too much material and not being able to flatten it. And then you know how it goes. You just carve, and then all of a sudden you realize you've whittled away all your material. So I took out about as much of it as I could. I wasn't really planning on using the anvil part of this anyway. But I just worked the sides and all the parts that had deep gouges in them with the disc, and it did a really great job. That's not me making nice with the vise, that's me realizing it's really hot after all that grinding. And look at the face, it came out nice and smooth. So into the vise go the other half of the jaws, and trying to figure out a good way to chuck this up was difficult. And then I realized there was that ridge, so I did what I could. I realized I had to get the top first, so clamped it in this way and worked the face again, same way I worked the other one, just to get the deep gouges out. And you can really see, this is a good angle because you can really see how chewed up it all was. Now the magic happens. Yep, I'm happy with that. Back into the shop we go, and this time it's to paint. So a liberal amount of masking over any steel parts that need to stay steel. I even decided to plug up some of the holes for the threads just to be on the safe side. And this Hammerite paint, I wasn't quite sure what to expect, and as soon as I started stirring it, I realized how thick it is. I mean, this stuff it's like almost like pancake syrup or honey. But it's just awesome. The color change in it is great, and it gives this nice 2 to 3 different color tone look to something when you paint with it. It's beautiful stuff. And actually, when I got this can, I had to import it from the UK because it was a little bit difficult to get in the United States. It's still kind of difficult to get it in a can, and a lot of companies will offer hammered metal paint, but Hammerite is kind of the standard for this kind of stuff because it's not just a paint. It also stops rust. It's kind of a rust converter and a rust cap. So if something does have some residual rust after you start doing the resto, the Hammerite paint will actually stop the rust from spreading and seal it so that you don't get any more of it. And Hammerite does recommend that you do 3 to 4 coats. But this is the second coat, and this stuff went on so thick that I didn't feel like it really needed it. So I put a second coat on, and then I just left it to dry out. In this case, I was smart, and I didn't leave it 24 hours so that the paint actually hardened, and then you ruin it when you take the masking off. But this is the part that's the most nerve-wracking because this is where you find out if you did a good job masking it or not. And frankly, I did a pretty good job, and that's impressive because usually I stink at masking stuff. So now it was time to reassemble this, and luckily for me, it went back together as easily as it came apart. It was a little bit from me clamping it in the drill press vise. It was a little bit, the rods were a little bit askew, but putting them back in kind of got them nice and loose again. Okay, so let's have a little reminder of where we started. This is how we started. A little bit of rust, a little bit of dirt, some chipped paint. Wasn't really loved, but it was definitely used. And this is where we ended up. And I am so happy with the way this little guy turned out. It's definitely a big improvement. The Hammerite paint looks fantastic. All the metal parts look nice and shiny and clean again. This thing functions perfectly. I don't know what brand it is, but it does say on the inside of the jaws that it was made in the USA. So whatever brand it is, they did make a tough little guy. It really, really did hold up to years and years of use, some rust, some non-care, and ended up turning out really good with a relatively easy, pain-free restoration. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed my processes. I hope you learned something. And hopefully I'll see you again soon with another project that you'll enjoy just as much. Have a great day, everybody.